Hello? This is Mackerel Phones. Dreaming Sarah is a side-scrolling adventure video game released in March 2015, developed by Andre Chaga Silva. Currently, it is the first and only release from Asteristic Game Studio. The player controls a young woman named Sarah, exploring a world in her dreams, interacting with strange characters, and collecting powers along the way. Dreaming Sarah takes heavy inspiration from Yume Nikki, the 2004 surreal horror game from the reclusive Kikiyama. Yume Nikki concerns a girl called Madotsuki who explores a world in her dreams, interacting with strange characters and collecting abilities called effects. The two games convey their stories without cutscenes, instead depending on player action and observation. However, the effect of their stories is still very different, and so comparing them could be interesting. Yume Nikki is beloved to many, including me. Craving something else that could satisfy the same thirst for wonder and dread, I purchased Dreaming Sarah. It went on to be the subject of my first uploaded Let's Play.
It probably could. You know, this is kind of like Yume Nikki, but like a lot more friendly.
How did I even make my voice sound like that? In any case, anyone who happens to look at my channel can be glad I've learned a little since then. The resemblance between Dreaming Sarah and Yume Nikki is clear, but the connection is not an assumption. The Steam description even says so! It's a selling point. Andre Chaga Silva is hardly the only developer to take inspiration from Yume Nikki. The almost sacred quality of the original inspired a minor genre, the most notable of which are probably Dot Flow, Yume Nikki, where the ni is 2, and Lisa the First. Besides the side-scrolling perspective and the nice music by Anthony Septim, or Septime, I don't know, what sets Dreaming Sarah apart is a comparatively clear plot and a more linear structure. Yume Nikki can be considered plotless. This is not to say there is no story, but the incidents Madotsuki encounters are disconnected and occur in no set sequence. Madotsuki can find the frog effect first, or last, or encounter Uboa before finding any effects, or never encounter Uboa at all. Episodes like the spaceship crashing on another planet have become well remembered among fans, specifically because so few of them occur. The story is primarily the player's experiences trying to understand the dream world. No characters even offer any dialogue. The player receives no context for the grasping hands or the towering stairway into the sky. Why does Madotsuki not leave her room? Why does she have the same dreams every night? Why does she need to find the effects? Madotsuki's name actually means a window envelope, I think. Like these. In this way, Kikiyama tells the player that Madotsuki is giving them a small window into another world, maybe a dream envelope. What more there is to the character, if there is anything more, is never made clear. The story of Yume Nikki is mainly the player's story. The player comes to understand how to navigate the dream world, what the dream world means, whether its inhabitants are friends or enemies, and which are which. Or maybe the story is about how the player does not understand and never learns. Whatever the player makes of the story, it will consist of puzzling out possible vague connections between images of eyes, the placement of the knife, the deformed girl, and the myriad other scattered episodes of the journey. However, there is no moment where the player says, "I see! It fits together!" But the pieces are still suggestive, each event and area designed to encourage the player to consider how they fit together. The pieces might not form a coherent plot, but at most an emotional state. Dreaming Sarah, on the other hand, is different from the start. The entire dream world cannot be accessed initially. Most events must occur in a scripted sequence. Sarah has to get the umbrella, the seeds, and the hat to get to the desert. There she has to get lost and get the compass to find the well, and so on. The result is that the areas and events are presented to the player in a deliberate sequence that affects the player's understanding of Sarah's situation. The other characters Sarah encounters have dialogue, which allows for much clearer roles in the story. One character even receives a small arc. First, they want to find their umbrella and are rather rude to Sarah. Later, Sarah finds and apparently steals their umbrella. But even later, we learn this person's umbrella is actually a large leaf, and they apologize to Sarah for being rude. This is already far less ambiguous than any part of Yume Nikki. Moreover, Sarah is a distinct character. Sarah is not a symbolic or metaphorical name. She puts her hands on her hips, yawns, and relaxes on benches. Even her crafty and sometimes ruthless method of advancing through the dream in the gameplay directly frames Sarah with a particular personality. As the gameplay of Yume Nikki focuses on exploration almost exclusively, there are few required events that would shed light on Madotsuki's personality. The player decides how Madotsuki treats other characters, and the player decides these characters' personalities from their appearances, movements, and the locations they inhabit. In contrast, Sarah has to treat characters a certain way to continue. Sarah must poison the creature in the mouth. Sarah must betray the bouncer. Madotsuki does not have to do much of anything to anyone. And the characters of Sarah's dreams speak for themselves. They make it clear what they think of Sarah, and what Sarah thinks of them. The player also learns the truth about Sarah's situation by the end. She is in a coma, and must navigate the dream world to wake up. Although the description on Steam also says this outright. Like Madotsuki's dreams, Sarah's dreams are full of suggestive imagery. Sarah finds a pill in a cold area, some voices tell her to stop. In an isolated place, at a bar on a moon with a suicidal pianist, Sarah can't get a drink because she has no ID. Finding a blurry ID, she's able to get a drink. She passes out, awakening on a highway in the same pose she has on the title screen where her dream began. And, although the player can miss it, she finds a crashed car, and her own body, also in the pose from the title screen. With this imagery and minimal dialogue, the player can create clear associations between the dream and Sarah's real life. Sarah has a problem with drug abuse, or contemplates suicide. She used a fake ID to buy alcohol, but then got drunk. Because she was drunk, Sarah crashed a car, flinging her body onto the road. She's in a coma after a drunken car accident. One of the longest two narrative sequences in Dreaming Sarah sheds light on why she might be drinking or have feelings of self-hatred and some preoccupation with eyes. As a fish, Sarah finds a corpse in a lake. Touching the body turns the water red. Swimming into a toilet, Sarah emerges in the restroom of some kind of club of moody people. Notice her reflection stares back at her, but it's not really her reflection. It moves independently and doesn't change color if Sarah no longer has her default color palette. Outside, Sarah meets the man who gave her seeds near the beginning of the game. He is the bouncer here, but is still kind to Sarah. However, Sarah distracts him so that the blue fairy can sneak into the club. Going back inside the club, Sarah discovers the blue fairy has murdered everyone, leaving their gore splattered on the walls. The bouncer earnestly tells her how this is the first job in a long time he has liked. In the bathroom, Sarah finds a bus card. She could use it to get anywhere, some text tells us. Well, they're missing a word, but pretty close. With the bus card, Sarah takes a bus to the starting area of the game. A coherent sequence of events emerges. Sarah accidentally got a friend fired. The corpse in the lake may be her guilt. Her independent reflection stares from the mirror in judgment of her. She emerges from a toilet because she feels like shit. With a bus pass, Sarah fled town. Her guilt led her to contemplate suicide, and with a fake ID, she tried drinking her sorrows away at a remote bar. However, driving drunk, she swerved on the highway to avoid some geese. The car crashed, and Sarah skidded out, leaving her in this coma. At least that's my understanding. There is wiggle room here, depending on how dramatic the player wants the story to be. Alternatively, Sarah was involved in a murder, and the eyes represent her staring pursuers. Alcohol did not cause her car accident. Rather, she was shot. There is a bullet near the scene of the car accident. This is a crime drama. But the point is, all of these interpretations come out as a sequence of concrete events. The linear structure allows the developers to craft the dreams to suggest this story. Instead of explicit events, the story is told in kind of sideways glances, in a non-chronological order with minimalist dialogue, yet a clear plot emerges. And that's beautiful. Dreaming Sarah doesn't entirely follow this model. The Mouth World, for example, or the drunken sailor on the island, seem to have no clear connection to anything. Much of the game is included simply to be silly and establish a tone, I think. Unlike with Madotsuki, Sarah's effects also suggest little about her. Madotsuki can get flowing blonde hair or become fat, for example, suggesting issues with body image. With Sarah, the most I can say is maybe her changing colors is suggestive of wanting to find a new identity after the incident at the club, but that's a bit of a stretch. Sarah doesn't seem to learn anything about herself. One might expect Sarah to wake up when she discovers she has something to live for, but nothing in the game suggests this. The final area involves Sarah running around in search of her doctor, while security cameras ominously swivel to follow her movements. The scene suggests Sarah doesn't trust her doctor. He's a quack. Nothing he says seems to be of any thematic significance. Even though the final character Sarah talks to seems to be a dead relative who asks Sarah if she's certain she still wants to live. What exactly happened to make Sarah want to live? None of her problems are solved. On the contrary, her dreams have reminded her of them. But Sarah does have something to live for. If the player explores her dream world thoroughly enough, the ending shows that someone cares about her, enough to visit her in the hospital and leave flowers. Some people would prefer Sarah's more concrete story, as a traditional plot, however abstractly presented, is much more satisfying than Madotsuki's abstract story. However, Yume Nikki does not necessarily even demand completion. Sure, there's an ending, but the player's experience is easily as satisfying from a few hours of wandering as from witnessing Madotsuki's jump. The narrative structure of Dreaming Sarah, in contrast, compels the player to continue until Sarah wakes up. But Dreaming Sarah, despite taking place almost entirely in Sarah's mind, lacks the interiority of Yume Nikki. Madotsuki's landscapes of grasping hands, staring eyes, ominous faces suggest much more of emotion and thought than Sarah's swamps and lava-filled caves, which are, for the most part, much more traditionally video gamey settings. In Yume Nikki, the player has an impression of exploring thoughts, anxieties, vague recollections, and emotional states given physical form. The wide, empty spaces and lack of direction contribute to this feeling. In Dreaming Sarah, the player explores abstract representations of real places. Traumas are represented, but the areas of the dream world are the locations at which trauma occurred, rather than the trauma's embodiment. And characters are here to give us direction and context for the things we see. There's much less interpretation. Yume Nikki is like video game poetry. I think the reason it resonates with many people, and resonates with me more than Dreaming Sarah, is the lack of a clear plot and resolution. It gives us ominous images and relatable fears of judgment, loneliness, alienation, asking us to tell our own story with them. Dreaming Sarah tells us the story of someone else. Which approach to storytelling is better? Neither. It depends on the artist's intention. Some video games want to have concrete plots, and others achieve their goals without any. At least, do you believe all this? I'm not sure if my argument here even quite makes sense, but I'm glad to get it out there and hope you found it interesting. This has been Mackerel Phones.